make a comment or ask a question. There is an issue raised by SAICA that a board chairperson may not be an auditor. Is it going to be workable that somebody who has got no background of the auditing profession be eligible to chair a body that specifically regulates auditors? What skill should that person have? And I'm not sure whether it applies to other regulatory bodies. Say it's a regulatory body for town planners. You don't have a background of town planning, town and regional planning.
In terms of the current legislation as well as in
Wait. We don't do things in that manner. We first ask questions, then we'll invite you to respond. That's an issue that I would like to get clarity. And probably to National Treasury and ERBA, there is an issue that is raised consistently of the right to appeal. Deloitte have raised that issue, and I think also SAICA have also raised the same issue. Is it provided for in the bill that there should be no right to appeal? Because if so, it will be in contradiction with the Constitution, Section 34, which allows anybody to have a right of access to the courts. And then the other issue that has been raised consistently is the seizure. What do we call it? Yes, as a measure of search of premises and warrants. What I hear Bernard to be saying is that it should be a situation where there is no cooperation, and it's also raised by SAICA and other stakeholders. But there is an issue raised very sharply by Mr. Mahlangu, who said that the profession remain untransformed and seem to be not attractive to young people, as he himself is a young person. It's a matter that Treasury will have to respond to as to what is its attitude in regard to the transformation of the auditing profession. Over to you, stakeholders and Treasury and ERBA. Alan and Tebu, you will assist me with the stakeholders or ERBA and Treasury as to if ever they are raising their hands, because sometimes I can't see them from my screen this side, to respond to the questions that have been raised.
I think for now it's only Mr. Nomvalo who wants to respond.
Okay, but the Treasury and ERBA will have to respond to some of the issues here, just to give clarity. Mr. Nomvalo, over to you from SAIC.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for jumping in too early. No. So, Chair, on the issue of the board.
I can hear Mr. Nomvalo from my side. Can you hear him from your side, Tebogenalan?
No, I can't hear him, sir. I'm not sure what's...
Mr. Nomvalo, you are muted.
connection.
And hence that if the chairperson of the board...
Mr. Nomvalo,
Yes.
there seems to be a problem with the audio. We can see you, the video is 100% visible, but the voice sometimes just disappears. I don't know whether your machine sometime in between mutes itself.
It would seem so, Chair, because I can see it's not muted and I'm not touching anything on the desktop to avoid accidentally muting. But can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. Can you go back to where you started on clarifying the question that you were responding to?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm saying, Chair, the current board, the current provision of the board. So I think because you will have some people with the knowledge of auditing, as well as we're proposing one registered auditor who's currently practicing, there will be that input in the decisions, but we don't think that a person who's not an auditor may not be able to chair the board. You need different types of skills in that space as opposed to the auditing skills. To the extent that that person will need those skills, the board will have, as the legislation prescribes, some people within the board that have knowledge of the auditing profession who will then help the chairperson in thinking through some of the technical issues that might arise. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Nomvalo. Are there other stakeholders from your side, who would like to fill the question?
Mr. Paxton, Ms. John, Janita John, Matthew Paxton, Janita John, and Ms. Brudix, Carla Brudix.
So there's Parks from Cosato. Who's the next one? So that I have to know.
Janita Jones and Carla Brudix.
Janita Jones and then Carla Brudrix.
Yes.
Okay. Comrade Matthews, over to you.
Thanks very much, Comrade Chair. I think just a few quick comments and responses. I think to Honourable George Chair, I would agree with him 100%. Failed the country, and it has failed the state and the SOEs with regards to its role during the era of state capture. So this bill is critical to deal with it. And of course, auditors can't regulate themselves. And we think that the bill will take us a step forward towards strengthening IRBA, which is critical. To Honourable Whip Comrade Abram, the issue of rotation is that, yes, we know there can be malicious compliance, as whether you have 4 meetings or 2 meetings in itself doesn't guarantee quality of governance. But the fact is that if you're going to reduce from 4 to 2, 2 is a very small negligible amount. It might mean you meet once in 6 months, or you may have 2 meetings in January and be done for the year. And given the amount of oversight, the amount of cleaning up the state, the amount of work, we fear reducing the requirement to 2 is opening a dangerous can of worms. In fact, they'll need to have many more meetings. So we think that it's just an unnecessary risk, Chair. Chair, we agree with Comrade Abrams that putting IRBA with when it can do search and seizure operations. And I think for us, Chair, it's also critical that the mandatory rotation of firms must be put in the bill. It shouldn't be left to IRBA to do it as it seeks fit, because you can find a new board can come into office one day and be captured. And then they can then take back some of the work that the previous board has done, which was quite useful. Chair, around the board composition, we are comfortable with the board's wording, the bill's wording that it shouldn't be practicing auditors, because there is inherent conflict of interest when you want to regulate yourself. I know there were some comments about balance between search and seizure and privacy. Chair, we're in an abnormal context of industrial scale capture or corruption, and the auditors played a key role. So we think we need to err on the side of dealing with corruption, not err on the side of privacy. All rights have a limitation, Chair. I think there was a very useful input by Open Secrets, where it talked about the need for fines to be proportional to the amount of damage done to the state, which often is in the billions of rands. I think that's a very useful input. We would want to see sanctions really being strong and as much of a deterrent as possible. I think lastly, Chair, we think there has been sufficient public consultation. This bill, as colleagues might remember, was before Parliament before the last elections. Space was given for more consultation. It's now come back again, and of course the department had its own consultation process. We're having the second round of hearings in the NA now, and of course the NCP would also have its own processes. We can't over-consult when we have to deal with capacity in the state and arresting the scourge of corruption, Chair. But I think lastly, Chair, I'm just a little bit worried about some of the content, and I respect people's rights to different views, but we're dealing with the area of state capture. It's problematic for the industry to say the laws are too strict. We can't be too strict when we're dealing with corruption, Chairperson. So I think the auditing sector really needs to have a deep introspection. What is the role they played? And we need to support the state and deal with corruption and state capture. We can't water down the provisions. In fact, if anything, Comrade Chair, to conclude, we must actually strengthen the provisions. But watering it down is just tantamount to saying corruption is okay. Let's continue business as usual. But thank you, Comrade Chair, members.
Thanks, Comrade Matthew. Ms. Janita Jones, over to you from ERBA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity. And what I would like to say upfront is that, we really appreciate all of the constructive comments that have come through. And we've heard you, we've heard the discussion thus far, and we take all of this into our ear, and we will be deliberating on these matters. We will further engage and we will further consult with all stakeholders that have provided input today. I will let MP answer the question on the right to appeal. She will respond on that. The one I take note of specifically is the item raised by Mr. Mashlangu on the dwindling numbers on the registry, as well as the lack of transformation. I would like to make an announcement that we have just completed a process where we have recreated, or we're trying to recreate the appeal of the registered auditor, the brand itself. And we must remember that it's not just the ERBA that plays in this value chain. It starts right from tertiary level through to SICA, through to the audit firms, and finally lands into ERBA as the custodian of the registered auditor. So we have developed an initiative which we will be implementing soon on recreating that appeal and making sure we attract people back onto the registry itself. The lack of transformation is noted. Yes, it's an area that's been underscored for quite a while now. We've had the CH Charter in place. We are busy reviewing what we call the Audit Profession Code, and we will be hopefully finalizing that quite soon from a transformation profession of the profession across, again, the value chain, taking into account the various stakeholders that would ultimately contribute to creating the pipeline of competent registered auditors onto the registry itself. Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman, and we will further deliberate and respond on all issues that have been raised at this session.
Thanks, Ms. Janita Jones. Didn't you request somebody or your colleague to clarify a question or a comment?
Yes, that was National Treasury on the aspect relating, and that's MP. MP is on now. Thank you.
National Treasury, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson and honourable members of the committee. Just to explain, as you alluded to Section 34 of the Constitution, any decision made in terms of the Act, there will be access to the court. So that's not prohibited in the current Act or in the proposed amendments. But my understanding is that the stakeholders are proposing a type of an internal appeal So when we respond to all the submissions, we will also deal with that aspect at a later stage when the committee schedule the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Alan and Tebogo, do we still have other stakeholders who want to make a contribution?
Chair, it's just Carla Badrix, and then I see there's Michael Marchant also raised his hand from Open Secret.
Okay, Michael, over to you, Open Secrets. No. Before Michael, Carla Brudrix, I noted her before you. Ms. Carla Brudrix from Deloitte, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I raised my hand before the state law advisor spoke, but we would welcome engagement on the aspect of appeal. We've sent some research on the aspect, and if we look at other pieces of legislation, such as the Financial Sector Regulation Act, the Financial Intelligence Center Act, the Tax Administration Act, the Health Professions Act, Engineering Professions Act, and so forth, Legal Practices Act, and then the recently deliberated Property Practitioners Bill, they all include an appeal process, either to a court of law or to a tribunal, and we would be happy to engage on those aspects. The aim of it is to bring constitutional balance into the law. Just on the topic of registered auditors, the other question that was asked by one of the honourable members, on the representation of auditors on the board, we propose that the 40% registered audit composition be retained. If there's a worry about independence, there's a possibility for the non-attest or non-assurance auditors, as they refer to, who are not signing off on audits. There's a possibility of looking at that to bring in the balance with independence. Just on the issue of comprehensive regulation, just to maybe just speak to that specific question or some of the remarks that were made by the honourable members. We fully support a comprehensive regulatory framework. We were hoping that the APA amendments are just one step in a broader regulatory framework, where we look at all the role players in the financial reporting ecosystem, and we're also happy to engage on that specific topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Carla Brodrix. Michael, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I just have a few comments to make, which I just want to address some of the questions that have been raised specifically to us, but also some of the points that have been made by other stakeholders in their contributions. The first one is just to reiterate the point that we've made around the URBA board and the importance of keeping that independent. And we would agree with the point that I think was made from Mr. Nombalo from SAICA, that the presence, for example, of a retired auditor, of someone of that nature, can bring in technical expertise in other spaces without having an actively registered auditor in a position such as the chairperson. We'd reiterate the evidence that we've provided to the committee, and this is from around the world, that one of the fundamental blockages in audit reform and audit regulation around the world are conflicts of interest. And to return to the member's question around our points about the appointment process, I think we would still maintain that it's important to have an explicit reference in the Act that demands that the minister considers conflicts of interest when appointing people to the board, particularly if the committee does start to reconsider the question around the 40% presence of auditors on the board. It is deeply dangerous to the process to have people who may have been working within various ways and forms, the people that they're then required to make regulatory decisions about very soon after that. And so I think this point really needs to be very carefully considered to ensure the independence of the board remains. A brief point just to reiterate the question of fines, which is that I think we quite strongly disagree with proposals from the industry to start placing maximum levels on fines to the industry. Just as a point of comparison, currently, the current requirement limit is 200,000 Rand for a fine, which is wholly inadequate. To give you an example of a fine that was just placed on Deloitte in the United Kingdom for a failed audit of a company that was then bought by Hewlett Packard, that fine was 15 million pounds, which is over 300 million Rand for the audit firm Deloitte itself. And then the audit partners individually were fined 250 and 500,000 pounds and was suspended from practice. And I think that it's the recognition in jurisdictions such as the United Kingdom that if you're really going to deter the very worst kind of conduct, you need to allow the regulator the space to impose very strict fines that will actually be a deterrent on, honestly, what have become unbelievably powerful and wealthy companies, corporations. And so I think going down the route of any maximum level would be incredibly dangerous. And then two final points, I'll be very brief, which is just to reiterate that some of the stakeholders mentioned this word, which is the expectations gap, which is something that comes up in talk about auditors all the time, which is this notion that the legislation is trying to fix an expectation gap of what the public expects and what auditing can deliver. What we've said in our written submission is that really what we should, and I think this reiterates Kasatu's point, is there's not an expectations gap, there's currently an accountability gap. Because what the public expects of audit firms is not an unrealistic expectation, rather it's a legitimate expectation of demanding financial propriety and that they're falling short of that. And so this act is not to bridge a difference in expectations, but it's to demand the industry aligns its conduct with what I think are legitimate demands from the public. And then finally, to return to the last question from one of the members around disclosure in the public interest, we just reiterate that in a number of places in the Act, when it comes to, for example, distributing the findings of a decision, explaining why a disciplinary process is being held behind doors, or, for example, disclosing information that you come across in your function in terms of the Act, we think that in all of those sections, there should be explicit inclusion of a provision for disclosure in the public interest, and that all decisions of URBA should be made public, and where not, adequate reasons should be given. And we do firmly believe that this is a constitutional imperative in terms of Section 32. So thank you again.
Thanks, Michael. Alan and Tebogo, do we have members who will want to ask questions or make follow-up?
No, we don't have any, Chair.
Okay. If not, we'll have to move towards the conclusion. In regard to the process from here, now that we have received public submissions, the department will respond to the submissions from the public on the 10th of November. From there, the committee will have a meeting to deliberate on the report and vote on the report on the 17th of November. So that's the process from here moving forward. From there, we'll submit the report to the Speaker to be tabled in the National Assembly. Then the Speaker will indicate as to when will be the plenary for us to present the report. I see the statement from Treasury. I'm not sure if members have seen that. The Minister has written to the Speaker to request a change of date in regard to the tabling of the MTBPS. Initially, the MTBPS was supposed to be tabled next week. I think, is it the 21st? Then now the minister has requested the speaker to shift the date to the 28th of October. And this might have an impact on our program. He has given reasons why he can't present or table the MTBPS next week. So I have to indicate to members right away that it will seriously affect our program. So we'll see as to how do we adjust our program in the light of the change of dates in regard to the tabling of the MTBPS. Do we have announcements from Secretariat before we close?
Not at this stage. The next meeting will be next week, Tuesday.
Okay. Thanks very much, honorable members, for participating in this meeting. Thanks to the stakeholders, members of the public for your submissions. Then thanks to Treasury, ERBA, and parliamentary officials. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Of course. You can see it. Enkosi, kenzini, siyalibuka, siyathokoza.
Asante. We have that one in our country. Swahili.
Which one?
Swahili, asante.
Asante sana.
Asante sana.